The beta for Diablo 4 is done, and now I had some time to reflect back at some of the things I encountered while playing some of the classes. Particularly Druids. Now you already know the title, and listen, you might kinda maybe already know the stigma around the Druid, which I guess is no surprise to anybody. We're gonna have a video on the overall feel and impression and generally a class review on Druid a little bit later, but until then, let's actually talk about one particular event that was both fun, frustrating, and bullshit at the same time. And that's when essentially I soloed the Stronghold at level 19 with my Druid so that I can access one of the dungeons and get some last levels in before the beta would run out. Now, if you don't know what this is, we'll have a video on that later on. However much it will be valuable once the game launches out, maybe that's something that people will be interested in a way to get to quick level 25. But until then, I did want to do this Stronghold. There was nobody else with me that I could do this Stronghold with, and I kind of had to solo it with, you know, the things that we know about the Druid. Now, a little bit of context, I didn't really have a lot of gear. I think I had 2 legendaries, which were kind of really not that important. There are a lot of good legendaries, and we will go that in also another future video, but as it stands, I think the initial legendary that I had was pretty much some tankiness to give me some barrier or fortified, and I had some boots that I mainly used because they had +2 max evade, well, +1 extra evade charge and some pretty good stats, but nothing necessarily build defining. Up until this point, I also had +1 in Cyclone armor from some other gear, which definitely did help with the 20% magic damage reduction, which, you know, adds up when you're as squishy as the Druid. And let's get into it. First of all, at this point, I was running kind of like a theory-crafted build that I tried to pull off by trying to make Werebear work, and I had Trample, Bulwark, Pulverize, Debilitating Roar, Storm Strike, and it was kind of supposed to, you know, generate spirits with Storm Strike and apply Vulnerable, and with Pulverize, I would essentially smack AoE, which is one of the abilities that does the most amount of damage. However, you are in melee for the Pulverize, and obviously with the Overpower addition to the Pulverize, every 10 seconds or so when I was healthy, I could really pretty much one-shot most things, which you think, hey, that means Druid has some damage, but I have to wait 10 seconds to do that, and that's only on one ability, and every other class pretty much has a bunch of these abilities that can just one-shot a small pack, and it doesn't always one-shot, by the way. However, the Trample was basically there for some extra damage, some CC, some pushback, some getting out of the situation and getting a little bit of stuns and damage and, you know, prepping stuff for a big Pulverize. Bulwark was clearly there to break me out of CC, to give me an Absorb, and essentially to help me survive, because even with all of this, I still died a bunch of times. And of course, Debilitating Roar was another source of damage reduction. It also healed me for a little bit. Some fortified, although the fortified numbers were essentially poop. And there were a lot of passives that helped me with spirit generation and some damage here and there. This is all a makeshift build. It's not necessarily something that I would recommend people play, but as it stands with the Druid on beta, this is pretty much the most you could get out of Werebear, no matter what you did. In terms of clearing out the trash and enabling the Stronghold for the last boss, it was okay-ish. It was the Werebear. I stubbornly stuck to it. I could have played a different build that did a lot more damage. Obviously, there's the Tornado leveling build that pretty much everybody knows, and it's on Maxwell as well, but I didn't really want to play a meta build. I was trying to see if I can make Werebear work, and it kind of worked. It was slow, it was squishy, but it was Werebear, and it was still clearing stuff, even though I died a few times. I've just figured, hey, maybe this is the Stronghold's content. Maybe this is how Strongholds are, because it was my first time actually doing a Stronghold, period, and I haven't seen anybody else do any kinds of Strongholds, even though prior to playing the Druid, I did level up a Necromancer on Hardcore, and we'll have that in a future video as well. Now, in terms of overall playstyle, I had to rotate defensives like Bulwark, Debilitating Shouts, Potions, Tramples for CCs, or even Disengage, and of course the 2 charges of Evades helped a lot while kiting, and, you know, either wait for my defensives to come back up or for my healthy overpower stacks of Pulverize to bunch up until Pulverize can actually do some damage. Definitely not something that you would have to do on any other class. Maybe Barbarian, but I haven't played that much Barbarian yet, and as much as I know about Barbarian, they are also facing some squishy issues. well, it was, you know, it is what it is. Normally, these numbers are probably not going to be what the numbers we will see on the game's release, but it is a showcase of what the Druid can do, or rather what the Druid has to do to at least be able to keep up with everybody else. And in terms of actually getting the boss down, while actually learning the mechanics, all of the icicles, the dodging and all of that stuff, the first attempt was pretty much a learning phase. I did get the boss down to 75%. However, much as I tried, since I was pretty familiar with this build and I kind of figured out, you know, the boss had similar animations to most Khazra demons. It does a big frontal swing when it jumps into the air, so obviously you don't want to be in front of it, throwing around icicles. That's pretty much, you know, a very common mechanic in Diablo 4, so I wasn't particularly unfamiliar with the spells. I just need to kind of get a flow of how the sequence of the spell casting is, because mechanics, and it was important for me to kill the boss so I can just level my druid. So I did take it down to like 75%ish. It felt so one-sided, even though I struggled so much to actually dodge as much as I can, rotate my defensives as much as I can. By the way, I had about 4 to 5 hours of game time on this particular build prior to getting to this point, so I was kind of familiar with how I should play and how my abilities work, so it wasn't me learning the fight and also being able to play my build right, whatever makeshift build this was. And it was very, very, very clear that I would have a massive disadvantage as melee because I was just very squishy. So I swapped to a wind shear and landslide build only because I had another legendary that makes the landslide hit twice. Is the landslide legendary? It's okay. It's for Druid, it's a lot of damage, but for, you know, in the grand scheme of Diablo 4, as much as classes can do damage, it doesn't do that much damage. But it was ranged, and it did give me the opportunity to potentially kite better, to stay out of its range, and essentially do more damage while being slightly safer. And it did work. I still had a little bit of trouble surviving, but I was able to get the boss down to 12%-ish. Obviously, I was lacking a bunch of tankiness with debilitating roar as well, but that was more than compensated with the fact that I was at range. Still, 12%-ish was a big change from 75%-ish, so I decided to try to see if I can make the build even better. I added Blood Howl for some heals, but swapped the boots to ones with no extra evade, which will probably be important. The boots that I picked up had essentially +2 to earth skills when I was fortified. I figured, okay, then that means maybe my landslide can hit a little bit harder. The boss was 12%-ish, maybe with a little bit more damage and a little bit more tankiness on my hand, or let's say, you know, a couple of extra potions that Blood Howl could amount to over the course of this fight. Maybe all of this would be good to take the boss down and get those last 12% off of its HP. And no, as it turns out, the lack of an extra evade didn't really help. Even though I was more experienced on the fight already, I only got the boss down to 20%-ish. Not great at all. So I swapped my boots back up to the +1 to max evade. Obviously that was really good, and by this point I already learned all the mechanics. I pretty much timed my dodges as well as I could. I used my barriers when I ran out of dodges. Blood Howl was popped on cooldown for the HP, not to mention the extra spirit that I got, that I didn't mention before, but I did get the capstone that gives you 20 spirit when you use it. And I used potions in between these abilities, and I managed to take the boss down to less than 5%. And I was like, yes, so close to getting that last bit. And I went to pop open my abilities and realized, hey, I had a wild point here that wasn't making any sense. I had 1 point put into Wild Wind Shear, which makes it generate a little bit more spirit for every other target hit past the first one, or something like this. It just was supposed to be active if I hit more than one target, but obviously since I'm fighting a boss, there's only one target, period, so this would actually be a useless point. So I took it out, and I don't know, I just tried to figure out a point where to spend it on, and nothing really made sense for my build. Okay, 2% more damage there, a little bit more damage on range. Nothing felt amazing, and I realized, well, whatever, I'll just put it into wolves and see how things are. Well, just as it turns out, I put it into wolves, and yeah, looks like the boss kind of really only targeted the wolves, and I kind of had to use maybe 1 or 2 health potions. I might have used the barrier or 2. And yeah, the boss died, so... All of that work for what, man? Jesus, dude, this was such a trip. Let me tell you, in a vacuum, for if you've just seen Druid playthrough, or if you've just played Druid on the beta, or if you're only interested in Druid, this was a pretty cool fight. This boss is probably the most interesting boss that I had to fight so far in Diablo 4. Probably because it's very punishing. Obviously, there are other bosses in the story that have some other cooler mechanics, but this boss felt like a skill check if every ability that this boss did had any kind of meaning. And it did for Druid. If you got frozen, you would probably die or at least be taken to like 10% HP if you were full HP. If you got hit by the frontal swing, you'd probably die or at least be taken very, very, very low. If you stay in the little swirlies that just pop or the things that the boss throws away, you take a lot of damage. So properly using dodges, properly looking at the boss's mechanics and dodging its swings kind of really mattered. And every time I fought this fight, it felt like I was getting closer and closer to being better, and it felt really cool. It felt like, oh my god, I'm getting better at the fight, I'm a better player, I'm understanding my class better, I'm understanding the encounters, the mechanics, the timings, the phases, and all of that, because the boss did have phases, by the way. When it reached pretty low HP, start to do more things. And it felt really rewarding taking that boss down to 5%, only to come back at the end and trivialize the entire fight by simply having minions. I sat there not believing when I realized that the boss was just hitting my wolves, and all of the training and dodging, all of the mechanics and all of that was pretty much useless. Not really, I mean, I still had to dodge here and there, it was fine, but the difficulty was not even close. On one hand, it's nice to kind of discover ways to fight these types of encounters and figure out a really cool way that you can just trivialize and overcome the challenge. That's actually really cool to have in a modern game, and especially in a game like Diablo, where, as before with Diablo 3, you pretty much bursted through all of the mechanics, didn't really care that much. I don't remember last time I actually cared about the mechanics of an ARPG boss. Sure, you might dodge 1 or 2 there, but that's about it. But with this one, I cared about every single one. And the fact that just having 1 point in very weak minions, the wolves, they're very weak, we'll address those later, just completely changed the fight 100%. I don't, that's the other, on the other hand, it doesn't feel like the fight should be trivialized to this extent by having 1 weak, particularly useless skill in terms of your overall output. The utility was nice, and I'm pretty sure other people as well pointed out how much utility you can get out of your minions to potentially survive, or while, you know, the minions, the bosses, the whatever, are focused on them instead of focused on you, especially if you are squishy and you are as a druid. On the third hand, we only have 2 hands, but hey, I have a third point that I need to make. I did this Stronghold fight on my Necro, and yeah, all of these points are particularly useless if the Druid itself will essentially get buffed to be at the same level as Necro, Sorceress, and all of that, or if the fights will become nerfed so that people can actually clear them, because we'll probably go into the game review eventually. This boss was not player friendly, especially for new players who've never played us out. If you've tried Diablo 4 for the first time in your life in the open beta, figure out if you're gonna buy it or not. If you played only Druid, you might not be convinced about the game. And this fight particularly summarizes the pros and cons in Druid. There's no pros, all cons, I'm sorry. Now we'll get into it, but this was a trip. It was very fun, but at the same time very redundant, because no other class has to do this, and it's unlikely that this class will have to do this when the game is released. This was incredibly difficult, and definitely, I mean, it was kind of rewarding, but I would be surprised if all of the classes will encounter this at the same level and still struggle just as much to clear this. And I know there are other people who've cleared this with the Druid, especially on hardcore, and it's a treat to see it. It's very satisfying to beat it, but when you think that every other class just blasts and blazes through this with not even close as many issues, it's just a joke. It's a joke. But hey, hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned, like and subscribe. We're gonna have more Diablo 4 content and Diablo content in general, so hope you enjoy. Love y'all. Peace.